the edge of the continent north of San Francisco. And I'm on my way home from recently attending the Ecological Farming Conference in Pacific Grove, California, near Monterey. This was the 45th year of that conference, so it's an interesting coming of age, sort of middle age for the organic farming movement. It was started in many places, but the area of Northern California centering around UC Santa Cruz, Watsonville, Davis, California, and the nearby Capay Valley were definitely some of the early strongholds where many of the techniques that we identify as modern organic farming were developed, whether it was tillage techniques, drip irrigation techniques, plastic mulch, bed shapers, cultivating tractors for small scale approaches, and many of the things like salad mix and the wide array of vegetables and fruits that are now commonplace at anywhere that sells organic produce. So the first time I was able to attend the first time I was fortunate to attend this conference was in 1993 when I was 21 years old, and I was a student at UC Davis, and I obtained a scholarship to go for a day or two. And I've been back a number of times, although this was my first time attending since I was among the keynote speakers in 2014. So it had been 11 years since I'd been. And in that ensuing time, we've seen a lot of changes in our food system. Obviously, COVID changed a lot of things, but in particular, the centering of social justice and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the growth of a lot of the nonprofits and other ancillary organizations that support organic farming or access to organic food. And so it was interesting to attend as a farmer. I've been a full-time organic farmer for 29 years now. I'm about to begin my 30th year. It's January, so we're just getting going now. And I just wanted to share some insights and reflections as a farmer, because what I've witnessed is the narrative so often, whether it is social media, YouTube, or the media, or print media, is so often happening from what I've come to learn is called the administrative class. And so the administrative class includes people like university researchers, people that work for nonprofits that are around food access and this type of thing, or certified organic certifiers. Like in Oregon, we have Oregon Tilth. Here in California, there's CCOF, which is the California Certified Organic Farmers. There's other organizations around the country, but they're all under the umbrella of the USDA. They have to comply with the federal rules. And then other elements would be, there's other NGOs, basically, government officials, people that work for NRCS or the USDA or, some local state level Department of Agriculture. And so when I first started going to conferences like this, I felt like it was probably about 70 to 80% farmers, and then the rest would be in this administrative class. And now I feel like that's flipped, and there are not nearly as many farmers. For one, they can't afford to go. They have to pay on their own dime, whereas the people who are in the administrative class oftentimes are getting paid to attend as part of their job, and their employers and those who are working for the government in some capacity, ultimately taxpayers like us, are the ones footing the bill. And many of the workshops too are the people leading the workshops and speaking at the workshops are people that are not farmers, telling us about soil and water quality, labor issues, and just the whole system of agriculture and distribution. And I find this really interesting because, there is a role for these people, just like the food supply chain begins with everything from the people that grow the seed to whoever is supplying the fertility, whether that's coming from manure or some, bagged fertilizer processor, to people that work for irrigation companies that distribute and manufacture drip irrigation and what all the tools you need to irrigate, to tractor things, to loan officers at banks, to educational elements that are providing resources to farmers, to the regulators that are either working for a certified organic agency, organization, or water rights examiners. And then you get down to the distributors, the farm workers, the people that work in the markets. There's a big wide swath of human beings that are involved in this. But what I find is deeply troubling to me, and this is why I wanted to make this video, is the farmer increasingly is not part of the discussion. And I remember when I first noticed this was years ago when Michael Pollan, who wrote that brilliant book, Botany of Desire, which I really love that book, and if you haven't read it, I highly encourage you to write it. But he's a writer. He's not really a farmer, maybe he has a small garden. But he was the keynote at EcoFarm quite a few years ago. And he gave a good talk. He's a smart guy. He has some good things. But it's not coming, he's paraphrasing. He's paraphrasing what farmers say. And there's something unique about those directly involved in agriculture, whose hands are in the soil, and they spend their days squatting or stooped over or sitting in a tractor or working in the shop fixing something. And I find that voice is being eclipsed by this administrative class. And I recently, too, was at an event in my community called the Rogue Valley Food Systems Network Summit. And that was an 8-hour event, and there were about 140 people there. And my estimation is there were less than 10 farmers there. So maybe 7-8% farmers. Because I've lived in the community a long time, I tend to know who are farmers. And you can kind of just tell by how they dress. And they tend to sit in the back and that kind of thing. That particular event, all the presentations were all people that work for universities, nonprofits, and other government agencies or nonprofits. And the section on soil and water conservation was led by a retired individual and a man who worked for, I believe, the state or federal level. I think he worked for the state soil and water conservation district. And in that particular instance, I found that they were ill-informed, underprepared, and really it felt like an insult that we didn't have a farmer up there sharing their successful techniques that had worked over time with other people to understand this. And in this era where we're hearing climate change as a broken record, and I'm here to tell you, as somebody that's been a armchair student of climate since I was a teenager, so for 35 years or so, the climate's always changing. And maybe humans are contributing to it, maybe we're not. The climate was changing before modern humans existed. The climate was changing when we were peasant farmers. The climate was changing when we were hunter-gatherers. The climate was changing when we were primordial humans roaming the African savanna. The thing about agriculture, though, is that you need that empirical knowledge of people that are paying attention to the little signs, of the small changes in weather, the behavior of animals, wild animals, migratory birds, that kind of thing, the emergence of weeds, rainfall patterns, frost patterns, snow, bloom periods of native plants. All these subtle things, and the farmer is like the conductor of a great symphony, and they learn to listen to and observe many feedback loops and fine-tune their approach to do the best they can. And every farmer I know has failed so many times. Even the best farmer can never keep track with all that. So in that symphony, somebody's going to be playing out of tune, somebody's going to go on a little improv riff, something anomalous is going to occur. And what I fear is what I see happening across the spectrum. And we're at the confluence of a lot of difficult things. And I don't want to fault, if you're somebody who actually works in the ag sector in that administrative class in some way, as a government employee, university, nonprofit, something like this, advocacy group, I'm not trying to fault you. I see land access as a really high bar right now. It's really expensive to acquire land, and it's really expensive to set up a farm. And I'm here to tell you, it's really expensive to run a farm. With inflation where it is, I just learned Pepsi in 2024 raised their prices 17% over the year. And I've heard other reports of inflation being up to 23%. And the government's lying to you. If that's news to you, then I'm sorry, but we've all known politicians have lied forever. They just changed the math. But it's become exorbitantly expensive to run a farm. And I have a vertically integrated business built off my farm. So we're buying packaging material, paying for postage, fuel, all these other things, electricity, all the elements to do a seed company. And so I see these people that perhaps when they were younger, maybe in their 20s, they had a dream of being farmers, small scale farmers. And that's one thing I've noticed of having many interns and students over the years, thousands of interns and students, that when they're young, they all want to have a small scale farm and live self-sufficiently or live off grid or something like this. And then the reality hits of how hard that is, especially if you want to have a family. And so most farms in the United States, the only way it works is one of the farm couple works off the farm and has a paycheck, that regular paycheck that enables you to get loans and for lending or institutes to recognize you as a viable recipient of funding. Whereas most of agriculture, in my experience, your income and expenses are very cyclical and they don't necessarily correlate. So back to this idea of a young person that's wanting to start a farm, and then maybe they intern at a farm, apprentice at a farm, do woofing, which if you're unfamiliar with that term, it's an international organization called Willing Workers on Organic Farms, which is a great way to get experience and learn, particularly for people that grew up urban or suburban. And then maybe they go for it and they try and do it themselves. And for myself, I was 25 years old when I started my first farm, and it was just on a wing and a prayer, a wish and a prayer. And I was able to live really inexpensively and recycle and scrounge a lot of things and just make do, duct tape and baling twine, as they say. And then I see that people, they give it a try for a while, and then they realize how hard it is. And so usually one of the couple will go get a job, and maybe both of the couple, and then they say, okay, let's earn some money for a while until we can afford to farm. And many people get used to that regular paycheck and health insurance, paid vacation, all the benefits, and it's really hard to go away from that. And I know almost no farmers, at least in my community, I don't know any farmers that have paid vacation, 401ks, health insurance, maternity leave, these things that in the urban world people just accept as a normal thing. And so I think particularly right now I'm feeling a little bit of pressure to speak up about this is being at this ecological farming conference, and with Trump recently taking office and all of these sweeping strong statements about deporting migrants who are undocumented here in the country, which from the estimates vary because it's really difficult to get accurate census data on people that oftentimes are living below the radar, and understandably so. I'm not faulting them for doing so. I think in many ways we destroy the economies of Mexico and Central America through NAFTA and other extractive, Banana Republic, capitalist, extractive practices, which are deeply unfortunate, but it's difficult to undo that. So the whole existence of people wanting to migrate to the U.S., where it is the land of opportunity, there's abundant capital. But I digress. I want to get back to this point. It's estimated that about 40 to 60% of the farm workers in the U.S. are of undocumented migrant origin. However, so we can point the finger at Trump and say, you're bad, and all that, that whole approach. But we can also look at the failed economic policies where we as Americans want food to be cheap. And like in the valley where I live, where there are many organic farms and ranches and creameries and things like this, only 2% of the food we eat is produced locally, because most people are buying food at Costco, Walmart, big supermarkets, things like that. In Oregon, we have Fred Meyer, Albertsons, things like this. I'm sure wherever you are, you have the go-to where there's cheap food, things on sale. And many of my friends will shop at Costco too. I don't personally, because as a seed company, we have seed racks in a number of the small natural food stores in our area, and I want to keep those reciprocal relationships going. and check up on the seed racks and put my money where my mind is, because for one, as Joel Salatin once says, you think cancer's expensive? I'm sorry, let me back up. Joel Salatin once said, do you think organic food is expensive? Have you priced cancer lately? And people don't understand that our decisions have consequences. So the existence of large farms that require or have evolved, if you will, to rely on migrant labor that they can pay minimum wage or possibly less than, and subject people to possibly inhumane working conditions, is because people want cheap food. We're unwilling to pay for what it actually costs to produce the food, to produce the cotton, to produce all the things that we rely on the earth for. And so we externalize these costs, and the existence of migrant farm workers is a direct symptom of that. We should treat these people better than we seem to be currently now, and what appears to be in the future. However, it's not so simple as just pointing a finger at the current administration and saying you're doing it wrong. It's a systemic problem. And if we included farmers in the discussion a little bit more, who are the ones employing farm workers, whether they are documented or otherwise, but the documented ones are not making good money either, I'll have you know, and develop new models that ultimately are going to look like everyone spending a whole lot more money for food. And I know that may come as a shock to people who are living paycheck to paycheck, or possibly even outside of their means. But our food system is broken, and there are many factors of it. I just read a phenomenal book by Mark Bittman called Animal Vegetable Junk, and he's a New York Times food writer, and it's basically a synopsis of the food system. How did we get here? Of the history of agriculture, from the Fertile Crescent and early indigenous farmers in Mesoamerica and the Andes, to World War I and World War II, where we turned industrialization for the war effort into agriculture and then created all this surplus. And then the surplus became ethanol and fuel, sugar and corn syrup and seed oils and junk food, commodity foods, subsidies for these large producers. So again, lobbyists and more of the administrative class. It's not unique to the organic food system that we have an administrative class. I think that really arose out of the post-World War II military surplus mindset of capitalist extraction of the land. And then as the organic food system started, when I got involved in it, I remember Steve Solomon, I believe it was his name, he wrote that book, Growing Vegetables West of the Cascades, and he coined the term big O organic growers and little O organic growers. The big O organic growers, I'm part of that. We do it because it is a belief system. We believe in the care of the earth, the care of the water, the care of the people, care of the watershed, the species, and all elements of it. We want it all to work because that is what integrity is. And that's like how Gandhi said that the means must be consistent with the ends. Whereas the little O organic grower just doesn't want to use chemicals and is willing to buy, chicken manure or feather meal or whatever it is. It's basically just something in a bag or a bucket that's organic. But it's sort of a myopic system in my view, and is very much more in the Machiavellian approach of where that saying the ends justifies the means. So we don't, a little organic grower doesn't really care. You got the big ocean here behind me, the Pacific Ocean, and a lot of fish emulsion is not fish processing waste. They're literally out there mining small waste fish to turn into fertilizer. So it's just, instead of mining the earth for fertilizer, we're mining the sea. To me, it's just digging your own grave, or a shell game, if you will. So I guess the purpose of this podcast is just to get people to think a little deeper about these issues and ultimately go talk to a farmer, go talk to a farm worker, and hopefully, at these events, these conferences, the idea of diversity and inclusion and all that, that's great. But if you don't have a functional food system, and I know in my area, increasingly the only way farmers are able to make it work is one person has a job off farm, or they're patching it together with grants to make it work, because they can't make it work to charge what they actually need to have a living wage. I just talked to a grower who's in Santa Cruz at this event, and she said that the living wage for Santa Cruz, California is $37 an hour. No farmers paying that to growers, to their, to the workers. And if they did, the produce or whatever they're growing would be exorbitantly expensive. Nobody would buy it outside of, incredibly boutique areas like the North Bay or Beverly Hills or something. So, it's not an easy situation, and I think this is where the situation we find ourselves in this time in 2025 is that we're at the crossroads of many existential problems, and there is not one simple answer. However, if we don't focus on the primary producers who are giving the jobs to the farm workers, then we're totally missing out on the people that actually have their finger on the pulse of the earth and the agro ecosystems that grow our food. Because ultimately the farmer is just there moving some things around. They're definitely working hard, but the sun, soil, and water are doing the lion's share of the work. And somebody in their office working some government or nonprofit or university think, I'm sorry, you're really far from those feedback loops, unless you're spending 40 to 60 hours a week in the field, which I find it really hard to believe, because you got to write the next grant, you got to do the report, you got to make the spreadsheet and all that kind of thing. And like in the organic seed world, there's a emergent concept called participatory plant breeding. I don't want to end on a downer, so here's a win-win example. So pretty much since the Green Revolution and post-World War I, when we shifted to hybrid seeds and the whole Green Revolution system, which is really not necessarily just about hybrid seeds, but about excessive use of pesticides, fertilizers and insecticides, fungicides, that kind of stuff. We've gone from land-raised seeds, that was the seeds the farmers saved themselves, to now, I just read a statistic from 2021, which is the most recent from the Organic Seed Alliance State of the Organic Seed Report. And for farms 160 acres and more that are certified organic, I'll have you know, only 24% of the seed they plant is organic. As farm size goes down, there's a higher percentage, I think it's up to 80% for farms 3 acres or under, that they're actually using organic seed. But it's very rare to find a certified organic farm that's planting all organic seed. And that's because we've outsourced plant breeding and seed growing away from the farmer. So this participatory plant breeding model is including the farmer. So the plant breeders, whether the university or industry people, are going to the farmers and saying, hey, what would be better? How would it work? How can we work together? How can we actually divert some of these resources from government grants, from foundations, to actually paying farmers to be in the field and leverage their immense knowledge? If you think like a brain surgeon or a rocket scientist has more knowledge or experience than a farmer of similar, then I'm here to prove you wrong, because that's just simply untrue. And oftentimes those kind of people are so hyper specialized, they don't really know much outside their field. Where a farmer can tell you a lot about the weather, can tell you a lot about the soil, it can tell you a lot about the microbiology of the soil and the systems, it can tell you about botany, it can tell you about marketing, business, labor relations, and probably give you some philosophical advice about life. So that's what I have to share with you today. Don't forget the farmers. If you don't know a farmer in your life, go meet one, go strike up a conversation at a farmer's market, maybe offer to take one of them out for a cup of coffee or lunch and pay for it, because no farmers means no farms and no food. And I see a lot of people complaining, oh, Bill Gates is buying up all the farmland, or the Chinese are buying up all the farmland. Well, maybe you should get involved in agriculture. And I'm sorry if I'm a little upset right now, but it's really disturbing, because I'm watching this administrative class kind of hijack the narrative, and I'm done with it, because they don't really know. And it's sort of like somebody that's never been somewhere telling you how great it is. If you've been there, you know. And that firsthand empirical experience is where knowledge comes from. It's where wisdom comes from. And that's what I want to share today. So know your farmer, get to know a farmer, become a farmer, support a community farm if you have the resources. Get together in your community, buy up some land, preserve some open space. Farmland's awesome for habitat for so many species. And farmers and ranchers control a lot of the best habitat on the planet that isn't high elevation or rocks or ice. So the better job we do at that collectively, the better chance we have of preserving not only agrobiodiversity, but the whole of biodiversity that keeps resilient, regenerative systems intact. So thanks for listening to me. If you made it this far, check out other episodes. Please share this episode if you want, and subscribe. And check out, we've got an audio version that you can listen to on Spotify or any of those places. And thanks so much for even just being curious about agriculture and farming and how to directly interact with the earth and participate in nature. So God bless you and all that you care about. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.